Let's make history.
You're only the boss if you put up your own money. If you don't put up your own money, I don't care how much somebody gives you, you're nothing but a supervisor. It's not yours. So how much money can you get paid to not, there's no money in this world for someone to pay me so they could call me, so I could call them a boss. That's like calling somebody daddy. How can a man call another man, yo, that's my boss? We don't do that.
I mean, everybody at some point has to have a boss, right?
No, not in Harlem.
Harlem, the neighborhood of all neighborhoods, sometimes referred to simply as Uptown. It became a mecca for Black Americans and has such a profound history that it continues to inspire people all over the world. Originally, it was spelled with 2 A's, and it was Nieuw Haarlem, N-I-E-U-W, I believe it was, and Harlem with 2 A's. And I had learned this originally in junior high school, and I'll never forget, my old classmate Reggie said, yeah, I heard Harlem had 2 A's and the Blacks and Puerto Ricans stole the other A. I know. I just wanted to share that with you and make the point that back then it was a harmless joke and everybody laughed because in the class I'm speaking of, it was nothing but Blacks and Puerto Ricans, and everybody thought it was funny. Whereas nowadays, people were running around with their hair on fire if they heard a joke like that. God forbid a white person said it. But the area of Harlem, that land was originally settled by some Native Americans known as the Wecquaesgeek. They were a Munsee speaking people, and they pretty much settled that area for possibly tens of thousands of years or more. You have to remember, New York City started at the tip of Manhattan, which was called New Amsterdam. Wall Street got its name because they literally built a wall there. Most people, I think, know that. But everything north of Wall Street was considered to be enemy territory. You were behind enemy lines if you passed Wall Street. Little by little, of course, they eventually did, but that was the overall thought process as far as the island. Hendrik de Forest, a Dutchman, in 1636 was the first one to go past way up into the area that would become Harlem, and he started a fur trading village and called it Nieuw Haarlem, as I stated. And fur trading was one of the chief industries of the Dutch. In the American Revolution, when George Washington suffered a defeat in the Battle of Long Island, him and his men fled to Manhattan with the Brits hot on their tail and began to make their way uptown. The Brits caught up with them in Harlem and they fought it out. George Washington won that battle and then proceeded to go into New Jersey. And that legendary showdown was, of course, the Battle of Harlem Heights. You know, Harlem has a similar history to the Bronx in that, believe it or not, Harlem and the Bronx at one time were considered the countryside. How hilarious is that? When nowadays in the 21st century, they're actually the total opposite of that. But as I stated, New York City sprang forth from the tip of lower Manhattan as you had immigrants flooding into Manhattan from all over the world, mostly different parts of Europe, but really from all over the world. Imagine how congested it became down there. So, and at the time, you didn't have the hygiene standards that you have today. So the filth, the sanitary conditions were nauseating. You had infections, sickness, all sorts of issues. So many people who had the means, the wealthy, the elite, began to go uptown and into the Bronx and build these lavish estates. And for them, they were going off to the country, like their summer cottage kind of a situation. And so Harlem remained pastoral for many years. As a matter of fact, Alexander Hamilton even had a house in Harlem, and it is still there today. It's been moved several times.
Interesting thing about this house, it was actually moved twice. In 1889, it was moved the first time, And then recently, in 2008, it was moved a few blocks from here. They actually lifted it up on stilts, brought it down, and put it on wheels, and actually drove it pretty much down to this new spot. It was sandwiched in between two buildings. Pretty nuts. People would just like gather and like drink their coffees and watch this giant house be wheeled down the street. That's a pretty cool thing. Good thing there was no Instagram back then. That's very, you know, like people be doing this in front of the, you know, moving house. But pretty cool here in St. Nicholas Park is its final resting place. But this was the beginnings of Harlem.
But you can go see it. It's now a national monument, and it's on 141st Street between Convent and St. Nicholas. Like many neighborhoods in New York City, first you had the Germans who occupied the area. Then you had the Irish generally, but not in all places. Then you had Jewish people and Italians. So same thing in Harlem. First was Germans, then there was a large Jewish population in Harlem, and then Italians. And Italians stayed the longest. In the mid to late 1800s, you had elevated trains which were extended up into Harlem. And when that happens, once an area gets a train station, they get an immense boost in their economy and in their population. So, and especially with Harlem being right there, not far from the lower parts of Manhattan, you know, on the same island, Harlem really got a boost. Landlords were practicing segregation. They would not rent to black people. Harlem was all Jewish and Italian. Then the panic of 1893 hit. When people talk about a financial crisis, they almost always bring up the Great Depression. But they don't talk about another depression that had an effect, which was the panic of 1893. And when that happened, property owners felt that they were in such a bind that they had to change their tune and begin to rent to black people. So black people so in the late 1800s was when black Americans first started to come up from the South in droves. That led to the Great Black Migration, which is where millions of black people came from the South up into the North. Most of them went to Harlem, and this took place in the 20s and 30s. It started before that, as I said, the late 1800s and into the early 1900s at the turn of the century there, because proof of this is the NAACP created an office in Harlem in 1910, and that is before the start, what is considered before the start of the Great Black Migration. So you got 1910. When the 1920s rolled around, forget it. They were coming in by the droves, and it became a full-on black American enclave at that point. And these black people were escaping the horrific and disgusting Jim Crow laws of the Deep South. There were much more resources in the North anyway. Not that they didn't experience racism in the North, because they did. They absolutely did. But nothing compared to the blatant lynchings and humiliation that went on widespread in the Deep South. And so with all these people coming together, living shoulder to shoulder, cramped in, with the population spike that the elevated trains brought, they created what I like to call the tenement fields. Basically, blocks and blocks of tenements as far as the eye can see. In some places it was brownstones as opposed to tenements, but same idea. Many of those buildings, by the way, still exist today. So you have all these people in one place, in one cramped quarters, a new place with a common identity, a common struggle, and more resources than they had before. So it gave them such a sense of hope that blacks began to dominate and make significant progress in almost every field in academics, art, literature, poetry, the sciences. Thus was born the Harlem Renaissance. And this even had an effect all over the world, because black people in Paris were even inspired and began to write and began to explore academia. In fact, so many blacks left the South that it disrupted industries in Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, etc. Just to show you what a profound impact, you know, it had on the country, even the world. So you might be asking yourself, so what happened? And what happened was the Great Depression. Jobs became scarce. Many black people lost their jobs, and Harlem quickly fell into a deeper level of poverty. You had 125th Street, where it was like a vaudeville. Even before blacks arrived, they had vaudeville shows across 125th Street. And even when the blacks got there, jazz clubs. It was basically a strip of restaurants, bars, clubs, and entertainment district. And when you have that, that automatically lures in seedy elements, the mafia, you know, the mob, and various other criminal enterprises. And it was no different in Harlem. And that gave birth to your Bumpy Johnsons, your Nicky Barnes, you know, and later on down the line, your Alpos, your Rich Porter, your AZs. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to Will Flores TV on YouTube. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and X.